What'd you learn about yourself?
Everything. I learned that I needed to heal from my dad because I didn't fully know that before. I knew I could do hard things and be okay. I knew that I could take and I had to take responsibility for my emotional survival.
This is Emily Harmon, host of the Onward podcast. Welcome and thank you for listening today. I always try to kind of picture where my listeners might be. Are they driving in their car? Are they working out at the gym? Are you going for a walk? Are you doing some cleaning in your house? I'm just always interested. What are people doing when they're listening to the Onward podcast? And I just want to thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of the Onward podcast listeners. I can't see you and I don't know who you all are, but I just want you to know, I know you're out there because I see the numbers. I see how many downloads each episode gets. And I just want you to know, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. Lorna Rose is my guest today. Lorna is a writer and she writes nonfiction and poetry. And her work has been recognized by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association and the Oregon Poets Association. We talk about her childhood, some surprising things that she found out about her father as she was growing up, and how in her late 20s, she felt a calling and dropped everything to go work on a trail crew in rural Alaska, and how that completely changed her life. Lorna, welcome to the Onward podcast.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for having me.
I always love talking to people on this podcast, and especially writers. You're a writer. You write narrative, nonfiction, and poetry, and your work has been recognized by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association and the Oregon Poets Association. And you write about finding affirmation, vulnerability, resilience through writing. I'd like to learn more about your writing, what you write about, how you got into writing.
Sure. I'll just kind of briefly go over it because that could be like your whole show. But I was a writer from a young age. I was one of those that like won these like young author awards in school, like one of those nerd types. And I was also raised in a family of businessmen and engineers. And so creativity wasn't exactly encouraged. And I sort of got away from it. I would come back to it and then kind of get away from it. And then fast forward to graduating college, I went to work for a large corporation and writing just sort of just fell by the wayside, you know. And it wasn't until I was 35 and I had my son, my firstborn, that I really came back to writing. And I said, okay, this time it's for real. Like I miss it. I want to stick with it. And so I started writing about motherhood. I wrote essays, anything from deciding to be a stay-at-home mom to pumping breast milk. I mean, anything in between I wrote about. And I started getting brave and submitting my stuff to magazines.
That's interesting. So let me ask you that, because that does take braveness, because it's like, well, you know, there's so many people out there writing about breastfeeding and being a mother. Why would somebody want to publish what you're writing? Did you think about that?
I kind of did a little bit of research. There are magazines out there that do want to hear about that stuff. The motherhood is kind of their bag. That's what they publish. Mm-hmm. They publish essays and poetry about anything, about raising special needs kids to miscarriage. I mean, they really, that's their angle is motherhood. And so I started with those kind of markets. I got an acceptance right away. I remember from Literary Mama, which is a motherhood journal, lots and lots of rejections.
Yeah. How did you take those rejections?
You know, at first it's like, oh my goodness, like, oh my God, I'm never going to write again. Nobody likes my stuff. I suck. I should just put writing away. But you keep at it. And pretty soon those rejections can teach you something. And you can kind of get a special kind of energy from rejections, which sounds weird, but I've actually gotten rejections from pretty prestigious journals that are very nice rejections that are like, hey, we're not picking up your piece this time, but we really like your writing. Please send us more. And that can mean more than an actual acceptance. And I know that sounds crazy, but you learn, okay, I'm going to make this piece better, and you sort of come at it from a different angle, and it kind of gives you a different perspective. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So, and I think what you're saying too is that writing takes practice. You weren't born, I mean, you did write a lot when you were younger and everything, but for somebody who's wanting to maybe start writing or put themselves out there, the more you write, the better you get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it takes a lot of persistence. It takes a ton. I think someone said it's like writing is like 10% creativity and 90% persistence. And I totally agree with that.
Wow, that's interesting. So you said you write about vulnerability and resilience. What kinds of, in the Onward podcast is about facing adversity and moving forward. What do you write about some adversity that you faced in your life?
I do. I do. My first book length project that I completed 2 years ago is a memoir. And part of my memoir is my childhood and growing up with a dad who was verbally and emotionally abusive. And writing that memoir was really affirming for me.
Is your dad
It
still
was
alive?
He is. Yeah. We don't have a relationship. He doesn't know I've written this memoir.
Okay.
He might someday if it becomes an actual book. But yeah, he's still alive.
So did writing that help you process some of what you dealt with as a child?
It was really affirming. That I think what was most affirming about it was, I mean, I did say it was difficult to write, and it was, but it wasn't as difficult. The scenes that I wrote between me and my dad, and then kind of when things really kind of hit the fan, writing that stuff was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as I was anticipating it would be. And that was the affirming part. Was, I had done the work on myself. I had been to therapy. I had looked within myself and really healed myself to the point where I could write about this and it wouldn't tear me to pieces.
I mean, I was married to somebody who was verbally abusive, and it took, when I saw it hurting my children, that's when I was able to leave. I put up with it for way too long. And verbal abuse is really painful because it's not like a bruise shows up and people can see it. It's all internal. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I grew up in a affluent suburb of Chicago, and people don't think at first glance. I mean, I think a lot of people might think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that abuse doesn't happen or happen as much in like sort of more affluent areas.
I think it happens no matter where. And I think that it happens behind closed doors, and it happens
Sure.
when nobody else sees. So you think that you're crazy because when you're out and about with other people, I mean, this is my experience. Everyone's like, what a great person. And, everything looks fine. But then it's a different
Mhm.
person behind closed doors, and you think you're crazy. And then sometimes things get better and you think, well, maybe things are better now. Maybe he's changed. But it's like a cycle. I had to learn that it's a cycle where the tension starts to build up and the verbal abuse happens again. And then sometimes there would be a situation where, I was braced for like a certain reaction and it didn't happen. So I'd think, oh, things are getting better.
Sure.
But it took me a while to realize, no, they're not getting better.
It can happen across all demographics and populations.
Well, I think that this episode will help people realize that. Hopefully.
Yeah. And Emily, what you just touched on about bracing yourself for a reaction, then you don't get it, and then you start to think things are better. That was my relationship with my dad. Is we had some beautiful, authentic, genuine moments where he was just this loving dad, and he was appropriate, and he was warm, and he was a cheerleader. And those moments, as few and far between as they were, that's what kept me going.
Yeah.
That's what kept me hoping for more moments. And that's what kept me engaged, hoping those moments would come back and there would be more of them.
Yeah. You want to have a good relationship with your dad.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, he's your dad. I mean, he's the first man in your life. I mean, he is going to teach you what a relationship looks like, right?
Yeah. So as a young teenager and young adult, did you act out your frustration over that verbal abuse? Like, did you do drugs or alcohol or anything? Or was it your writing that helped you get through it?
Well, so when I was 16, we found out that my dad had another family.
Oh, yeah.
He had a secret family that he had gone back and forth for 14 years, which was the majority of my life. I was 16 at the time.
Whoa.
All of my brothers' lives. I have 3 younger brothers. And so my family's culture is very much smile and be polite, be the pretty daughter, don't make waves, don't rock the boat, even with something like this. And so I was kind of alone to deal with it. And, it started out, I wanted attention for it. I wanted so it was kind of like, at first it started out like it was kind of I made it like a gossip thing. Like I would be on the phone with my friends, or I would go to school and be like, hey, this thing just happened to me. And but I was 16, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it was like that. And then I got through college. I went away to college, not very far from where I grew up, but it was a couple-hour drive. And then 10 years later, I found myself in Southern California. And that's when the partying really started, and the drugs and the drinking. And it was my way of trying to heal and trying to cope, because I really hadn't. I mean, I really hadn't even touched what I had gone through, what my experience was. I hadn't really dealt with it up till then.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it was a lot of partying in LA on the weekends, and a lot of going out with friends and doing ecstasy at raves, and lots of drinking and dating and promiscuity. And I look back at that time in my life and I wonder if I was trying to get my dad's attention.
Yeah, probably. How did your mom react to it? Was he verbally abusive towards her too?
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, obviously she was devastated. Beyond that, I don't know.
They stayed together?
No. They divorced the same year.
The same year that you found out that he had another family? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That would be the end of it for me too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it took her years and years to come around, really, to be able to kind of emotionally function.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And then, hopefully she got counseling and stuff, because like my story is just real brief, is that I don't think I really dealt with that verbal abuse. I ended up leaving, but then my drug of choice was staying busy and, kind of a workaholic. So, and just putting my everything into raising the kids. And so I just kept busy, heads down. And I thought when I retired a couple of years ago that busyness would go away because now I have all this time and I'm retired, but it didn't. So I really had to work at it and then do that inner work. And then he died. He got sick like a month after I retired, like 3 weeks. He was sick with cancer after I retired. And then he died like 5 months after that. And so then when he died is when, because he's my kid's dad and everything, is when I processed all of those feelings about the verbal abuse and the divorce and everything that I hadn't really processed. So for those people who are listening who are divorced, whether the person's verbally abusive or not, but you haven't dealt with the feelings from the divorce, you may think that you're going to be fine if that person dies or gets really sick, but just be aware, because man, it's hard to get through.
Yeah. So, and things can trigger it too.
Yeah.
You might have done all the work in the world and you're good. And then you see someone or someone says something and it just comes kind of roaring back.
Do you find a situation where maybe you're with, like, let's say your husband now and something's happening where it would be a situation where your dad would snap at you, but he's not going to? Like, I've been in those situations where like a tense moment with a boyfriend or something and I brace for the abuse and it doesn't happen. And that person has to remind me, Emily, I'm not him. So it's still, I left him in 2000,
too, it still impacts me. So I'm
Sure.
sure it still impacts you, and you probably notice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was, my brother was just here for Thanksgiving, my middle brother. And he, of all my siblings, he looks the most like my dad. And he had just gotten this haircut when I saw him. It was a new haircut, and he had a mustache because he lives in Montana. I guess, every guy in Montana has a mustache. He looked just like my dad, like spitting image. And it was like, oh my God, like it was just this like, whoa. Because I saw my dad about 10 years ago at a funeral, but it just kind of shocking, to be like, wow, it's dad,
Yeah.
and it just kind of, for a minute, just kind of stirred up some feelings.
So you said that in your late 20s, you dropped everything to go work on a trail crew in rural Alaska. That sounds
I did. So I was in the middle of my partying and drinking in LA, and I think it was about a year into that lifestyle. And I started to be like, I feel like there's something else for me. I feel like I should be doing something bigger, or that I'm meant to do something bigger. And I talk about it in my book as feeling like I'm standing in a gigantic bucket and I'm small, and my bucket is the potential.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a good visual. I think we all have that. Some of us see it, some of us don't.
So I was kind of messing around one night on the internet, and I came across this opportunity with AmeriCorps. And AmeriCorps is like domestic Peace Corps. It's a volunteer position. It's not as long as Peace Corps. I think Peace Corps is like 2.5 years. And AmeriCorps is all stateside. You don't go overseas. And AmeriCorps, you can teach, you can do a bunch of stuff, work with the homeless. This was trail work, like working on roads and hiking trails. And I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never done manual labor, never slept in a tent, but something called to me. This opportunity called to me, and it gnawed at me, and it would not let go. And I finally said, I have to do this. It makes absolutely no sense, but I have to do it.
Do you know now why you had to do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I had to just kind of restart my life, kind of just start over. I mean, I was 26 at the time. And I said, an instinct told me, this is it. This is your bucket. This is your bucket moment. And I went, and I tried to talk myself out of it, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh my God, 3 friends are getting married this summer. I'm going to miss road trips up the coast. All this stuff's going on that I'm going to miss. But in the end, it didn't matter, because I knew this opportunity was for me.
Like, how did your intuition reach you? Did it just happen, or did you do some things like meditating or just quieting down where you heard that inner voice talking to you? And then when you've got that, that's one question. And then when you've got that, that's your inner critic saying, stay safe, don't go. What are you doing? You've got some weddings to go to, you crazy girl.
Right. I'm a pretty instinctual person. So I knew right away that as soon as I saw this opportunity, I knew that I was going to end up going and doing it. But yeah, like you said, the inner critic was there, saying, what the hell are you doing? You don't know anything about camping, or I didn't know what a lopper was, or what a pickaxe was, or how to work a chainsaw, what Carhartt pants were. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know what a Nalgene bottle was. And it was pretty comical. I mean, there were some definite moments where it was very obvious I was a fish out of water. Very obvious I didn't know what I was doing.
What'd you learn about yourself?
Everything. I learned that I needed to heal from my dad, because I didn't fully know that before. I knew I could do hard things and be okay. I knew that I could take, and I had to take responsibility for my emotional survival.
Yeah, you don't want to be a victim anymore.
So I ended up, after that experience, coming back to Southern California, and I got into therapy. And I found a therapist just in the phone book. I just picked him out of the phone book, and he was the best thing that I had done for myself up to that point, besides going to Alaska.
That's pretty good, finding a therapist that easily, because sometimes, I know, at least for me, sometimes I've had to try them all out, and some work and don't, you connect and don't. And for those younger listeners, can you explain what a phone book is?
Yeah. So it's really thick. got a bunch of pages with like phone numbers and names and yeah.
Just kidding. So you went to the therapy and then you started doing some of your own inner work on yourself.
Yes. Yeah, I did. And it was tough. It's hard work to work on yourself. You've really got to look at yourself and hard. You've got to take a hard look at your patterns and your lifestyle choices. And, are they getting you what you want? And are they reflective of the person you would like to be?
Yeah. So do you think that work can be done on your own, or do you need a counselor or a coach or just somebody to go through it with? What would
Gosh, I think you need somebody. I mean, I did. I suppose it is possible to do it on your own, but that's pretty extensive work.
It is.
No. Yeah.
I go to counseling now, and when I go, sometimes I think, well, I think I just meet with her. Like, I think we're done. I think we've covered everything, and then we have a session, and I realize no, there's still some more work to be done, and I don't know that it ever ends. So it's nice to have that accountability, somebody that you can jot down questions and save them, and say this came up. It's nice to have that for me.
And I had found someone too that really was willing to dive deep. I mean, you mentioned kind of ineffective counselors and kind of finding your right fit. When I was 16, my mom did get my brothers and I into therapy, and it was not a good fit. It was not effective, or as effective as I needed it to be at that time. So that to find a good fit, sometimes it's a process.
How do you balance? How many kids do you have? Two? 7-year-old and
yeah. Well, sometimes it feels like 10, but it is
especially during COVID. It's 2.
We have a boy and a girl. Yeah,
7 and
5. So how do you second grade and kindergarten?
How do you balance writing and being a mother and COVID?
Oh, geez. Well, I don't know. I'll answer the first question like in non-COVID times.
Okay.
Because I started writing my memoir when my daughter was born. And I don't really know why I did that, because that is the most inconvenient time to start writing a book, because I have a 2.5-year-old running around and then I have this newborn. For me, it was about setting boundaries and, and it's easier to do obviously when they get a little bit older. It's hard to set boundaries with your 1-year-old and be like, right. Okay, mama has to go right, go to sleep. And it's a balance. And it's about finding that balance, and that balance looks different for everybody. I'll give you an example. I nursed my daughter till she was 3, and I sort of let her let me know when she was done. It was going to be her decision. And those were some special, special times. I loved nursing. I remember one night being up with her in her room, doing her evening nursing before she went to sleep. And thinking one moment, oh my gosh, this is so special. This is such a great time. And the next moment was, God, I need to go write. I want to bang out such and such a chapter tonight. And it's really about finding balance mentally and practically as well. Because, the one thing I've always kept in mind being a writer mom is, your kids, these moments, they don't come back.
No.
Like once she was done nursing, she was done. And that was it. And once they say their first word, then that's it. That moment doesn't come back either.
Yep. You need to be present in that moment, and you can always write. Or do you have a routine of you're going to write a certain amount? Like, how'd you get that book done? Did you write a certain amount every day? Were you strict on that? Or did you just write when you felt like it? What would you recommend for somebody who might want to write a memoir?
Sure. I wrote when I felt like it, which was pretty much every day. I did not hold myself to a word count. I know some writers do that. To me, that just doesn't, it's not motivating to me. It's just like another chore or another thing that if I fail at it, then it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So I kind of wrote from within. I wrote what I was motivated to write. Kind of my loose goal was to write a chapter a night. My chapters, however, are short. I mean, some of them are less than a page. At the most, there'd be like 4 or 5 pages. So that was kind of my goal. Usually I wrote after the kids went down for the night, which was 8 o'clock or so is their bedtime. So I gave myself a couple hours to write. Some writers will wake up early. They'll wake up at like 4 or 5. That's like a thing. And that always sounded exhausting to me.
So you just got to figure out what works best for you.
Definitely. And finding a balance, you're going to, at least I would, I'd find a balance and then it would change or our circumstances would change. And that's okay. That balance will need to be readjusted. And that's all just part of it. So, I mean, I guess my point is, don't feel like a failure if you've got this balance worked out and then all of a sudden it's not working or something changes, because you'll find the balance again.
So why haven't you published the book?
I'm working on that right now.
Oh, you are? You're going to publish it. I didn't know if you were holding back or you weren't ready, but you are going to publish it.
Yeah. Well, I'm searching for a publisher for my book.
Awesome.
And that's a whole process in and of itself.
Yeah. What's the title going to be? Do you know?
Harvesting the Mountain.
Why that?
Because when I landed in Alaska, there's this mountain that I saw, and it was my first Alaskan mountain. I'm coming from LA, where I'm very into the makeup and hair and the clothes and all that. And I saw this mountain and it just looked very non-fussy and just naturally beautiful. And it could just be, this mountain could just be. It didn't put on airs. It didn't pretend it was better. It didn't think it was superior. It was just this beautiful, jagged peaked, snow-capped mountain. And it didn't have to work at being beautiful. It just was. And I said, I want to be like that mountain.
So how are you like that mountain now?
Well, when I got back from Alaska, I threw out all my makeup and I stopped. I down in LA, this is really embarrassing. I used to, when I lived there, I wanted to be discovered. That was my
who doesn't, right?
Yeah. But I really kind of took it far. Like I would interview myself in the mirror, preparing for the day, right? I was going to be discovered. And I pretended I was like this model actress. I spent every day doing this. And I obviously, after Alaska, I had changed enough that I didn't do that anymore. There was no reason to do that anymore. Yeah. My reality.
You discovered you, and you didn't need to be discovered by somebody else in order to be somebody.
Yeah. My reality had become better than my fantasy.
Cool. That's awesome. You were there for a year?
I was only there for 5 months, but I did like a few years worth of personal growth.
In 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's awesome. Now you really know who you are.
Yes. And I'm comfortable.
What would you say if someone said, who are you? Who are you, Lorna?
I'm someone who's had a journey. I'm a writer and I write often about that journey. I'm a mom to neurodiverse kids, and I'm a wife, and I'm someone who's grateful every day.
That's awesome. You didn't say I'm a survivor of verbal abuse or anything. It's like, you know who you are.
Yeah. I'm that too. But it doesn't come to mind.
Yeah, it doesn't come to mind. It doesn't define you or anything. That's awesome. So you've got a website, www.lornarose.com, and you have Twitter, and your Facebook is at Big Things Too. So I can put all that in the show notes along with your email address.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd love it.
Yeah. Any last words you want to leave with the Onward podcast listeners?
I think for me, it was knowing that I needed to heal from my past. I think that was the first big step for me. And then getting myself to a place where I had zero distractions, physically and mentally, where I could really just hone in on healing and what I needed to do. And it's hard. It's a really hard process. Meeting my husband was an even harder process because I had to learn how to trust. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to be loved.
Well, thank you for sharing your special journey, because I know that it will impact many of the Onward podcast listeners. A lot of us have been through some of the things you've been through, maybe not all, but all of these stories I think are important to tell and help people realize that they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for hosting the show. This is a great show.
Awesome. You're welcome.
When I think about Lorna being in her 20s and leaving LA and just going to Alaska by herself to work on that trail crew, it just amazes me. I mean, yeah, I went to the Naval Academy and I was in the 6th class of women to graduate, but I was with a bunch of people, had some support. I don't know if I'd ever have gone to Alaska to work on a trail crew. I think that's awesome, Lorna. And thank you so much for sharing your story on this Onward podcast episode. You can reach Lorna through her website, which is www.lornarose.com, Lorna rose.com. Thank you for listening today. Hey, have you heard that I don't talk about it a lot, but I am a coach and I have created the Onward Accelerator coaching program. I coach individuals and I also coach as a group. If you're interested in some coaching, it's all about what the Onward movement's about, which is basically embracing authenticity, releasing the fear of judgment, and just creating a life that you love, creating the life of your dreams. I think so many of us go through life and sometimes just don't take a chance, don't dream about what we really want. And I know that was kind of me for a long time. I just worked face down, raising kids, was a single parent a lot of my life. And I always had to put my job or felt like I had to put my job and others first, which at that point was fine. But then when I became an empty nester, I thought, well, what do I want to do with my life? I've got so much time left. And I started to dream and I've really created a life that I love and I want to help other people do the same. And a lot of it had to do with doing some inner work and better understanding myself. If you're interested in learning more about the Onward Accelerator coaching program, just send me an email at emily@emilyharman.com, or you can click on the link in the show notes. I put a link to the Onward Accelerator group coaching program, or you can go to my website and just click on the link to schedule a complimentary 15-minute coaching call with me where we can do some exploring and see if I can help you. And if I can't, I'll help you find a coach that can. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening.